3 children were held over an open fire and burned alive, not quickly, slowly, while their mother watched and could do nothing. That happened on August 20th, 1854, on a stretch of the Oregon Trail in what is now Canyon County, Idaho. 20 people stopped for lunch by the Boise River. By sundown, 18 of them were dead, and the 2 who survived crawled away with arrows still buried in their bodies. This is not a general Oregon Trail story. This is the story of one specific afternoon, one specific family, and the exact sequence of decisions that led to one of the most savage massacres in the history of the American West. The morning of August 20th, 1854, started like every other morning on the trail. Alexander Ward, age 41, from Johnson County, Missouri, was leading 5 wagons west, 20 people total, his wife Margaret, who was visibly pregnant, 8 of their children, their sister-in-law Elisa White, and her son George. A handful of hired men and fellow travelers. They had been walking since late April. Nearly 4 months of desert heat, exhausted animals, and dwindling supplies. But Fort Boise was close now, maybe 20 miles out. They could practically smell the end of the hardest part of the journey. They pulled off the trail mid-morning to rest by the Boise River. The animals needed water. The people needed food. It was a routine stop, the kind they had made dozens of times before. They spread out along the riverbank, unhitched the wagons, and started preparing a meal. Nobody was on high alert. There was a larger, more heavily armed wagon train that had passed through just ahead of them. That train gave them a false sense of cover. That sense of safety was about to get everyone killed. Here is what people miss about this massacre, and it matters. The Ward party did not stumble into a random ambush. They stopped in territory that had been quietly boiling for years. By 1854, as many as 8,000 pioneer wagons per season were grinding through southern Idaho, stripping the land bare, overgrazing, burning wood and sagebrush, driving off the game that Shoshone bands depended on to survive. The Shoshone were watching their food supply collapse in real time. Tensions across the Snake River country had been building toward a breaking point for years. What happened that afternoon was not random. It was inevitable. A group of Shoshone warriors approached the camp. Accounts vary slightly on the exact number, but most estimates put it at around 30 men. They moved in presenting the appearance of trade, a common enough encounter on the trail. Both sides had been trading for years. This kind of approach was normal. Ward's men did not immediately reach for their rifles. Then one of the warriors grabbed a horse and tried to ride off with it. A horse on the Oregon Trail was not just an animal. It was survival itself. It pulled your wagon. It carried your supplies. If you lost it 2,000 miles from home, you were in deep trouble. One of Ward's men did not hesitate. He leveled his rifle and shot the thief dead. That single shot is the moment the door slammed shut on 20 lives. The warriors, who had been waiting out of sight, moved in fast. The men of the Ward party scrambled into a defensive position, trying to form a line to protect the women and children. Alexander Ward, the leader, the man everyone was counting on, was shot down in the opening minutes. He never got a chance to organize a real defense. His men were outnumbered, caught in the open, and the attack came from multiple directions at once. They fought. Let that be absolutely clear. They fought hard. The battle lasted through the afternoon and into the early evening. Ward's men, despite being overwhelmed, kept returning fire and buying time. Every minute they held the line was another minute the women and children stayed alive. But they could not hold it long enough. This is the part that most retellings skip past too quickly, and it shouldn't be skipped. One by one, the men fell. Arrows and rifle fire cut them down until the defensive line simply ceased to exist. With the men gone, the wagons carrying the women and children were pushed off into the brush. What happened next in that riverbank camp is the kind of thing that gets quietly summarized in historical records as torture, because the specific details are too brutal to lay out in a public document. 3 of the Ward children were thrown into a bonfire and burned to death. Margaret Ward, pregnant with another child, did not survive. None of the women survived. What you have to understand is that there were two surviving boys who eventually described what they witnessed. The things they saw in those final hours of daylight by the Boise River are the reason this massacre never left the memory of the frontier West. 13-year-old Newton Ward had an arrow in his side. He played dead. His 15-year-old brother William had taken an arrow directly through his lung. He also played dead, lying still in the brush while the attack finished around him, the arrow still protruding from his chest. Both boys had watched their family die, and then they lay there in silence, bleeding, waiting for it to be over. When the warriors finally left, two brothers were alone. Newton, the younger one, was eventually found by riders from the Yantees Party, a group of men from the larger wagon train ahead who had heard the gunfire and ridden back. They found Newton wounded but conscious and carried him back to safety. William was not found. He lay undiscovered in the brush, unconscious, the arrow still lodged in his lung. When he came to, he was alone. No rescue party was coming back for him. He began to crawl. William Ward crawled and walked for 5 days through the Idaho desert. Arrow through his lung. No food, no water, no help. He made it to Fort Boise on his own. Think about that for a moment. 5 days. Arrow in his lung. 15 years old. When the rescue party returned to the massacre site 2 days after the attack, they found 4 burned wagons and 18 bodies. They buried the dead as best they could. The charred remains of 3 children were among them. The aftermath rewrote the map of the American West. The U.S. Army launched a punitive expedition in September 1855 under Major Granville Howler. The military response was harsh, and it did not discriminate carefully. The Shoshone reaction to the Army's retaliation was fierce enough that Fort Boise was abandoned in 1854, and Fort Hall, the 2 key trading posts on that entire stretch of the trail, also changed over time. The Oregon Trail through southern Idaho became, in practical terms, increasingly perilous. So dangerous that military escorts became a near necessity for safe passage. That condition lasted 8 years. 8 years of intensified attacks and relentless danger, all tracing back to one afternoon, 1 stolen horse, and 1 gunshot. What strikes me every time I go through this story in detail is how fast an ordinary moment can become catastrophic. The Ward party made no unusual mistakes that morning. They stopped where travelers always stopped. They responded the way frontier travelers were expected to respond to horse theft. There was no single decision that you can point to and say, that was the one that doomed them. The whole system was already loaded. That gunshot was just the trigger. And then there were the 2 boys. Newton and William Ward survived. They lived out their lives carrying what they had seen on that riverbank. Historians know relatively little about their later years, which is its own kind of tragedy. The frontier era produced survivors and then largely forgot to ask them what it cost them to keep going. What we do know is this. On the morning of August 20th, 1854, 20 people sat down for a meal by the Boise River, 20 miles from safety, and felt, for just a moment, like the worst of the journey was behind them. By the time the sun went down, 18 of those 20 people were dead. The final hours of the Ward party are not a story about the Oregon Trail in general. They are a story about how completely and how fast everything can fall apart once the first shot is fired and the people in charge of holding the line start dropping one by one. The 2 boys who crawled out of that riverbank and lived to tell about it are the only reason we know it happened at all, and that detail, more than any other, should sit with you.